Hello interwebs, welcome to No Post on Sundays, the series about computers that don't post that may or not... God damn it. That's a rough catchphrase, that. Hello interwebs, welcome to No Post on Sundays, the series about computers that don't post that may or may not be posted on a Sunday. Today I've got a PC specialist build here that does not boot. So, let's roll the intro, get this set up on the bench, and I'll tell you more about it. This computer is a no boot. The customer tells me that it was failing to start Windows, and the problem kind of progressed. It started off as it was installing an update, and then it wanted to restart a few times, and then after a couple of restarts, now it just won't start Windows at all. Now initially I kind of assumed that this would probably not be that interesting, so I plugged it in over the side, and yeah, it doesn't want to boot Windows, and I thought, okay, well this might be interesting to look at. I think we've got bad storage here based on the fault description. So let's take a look into this computer and have a look at what bad storage looks like and how we're diagnosing that. So let me get the power cables plugged in. Cool. So we have lights, fans, and noises. And it looks like we're going to post because the fans have changed speed, and we just had a beep from it. So we have posted. And we've got a ROG splash screen there. So far, so good. So we're sitting on this post screen. Sometimes you can get hung up on the post screen while it's trying to detect something or looking at storage, but this is taking too long. We should be seeing a Windows loading spinner by now, or just some other sign of it booting from something. We also still have the boot diagnostic LED on the motherboard. On an Asus motherboard, which we have here, it's green. And that LED goes out when something starts booting an operating system. If you're sitting with a green LED there, that means you've posted, but the motherboard hasn't found anything to boot from. It has not started booting an operating system or started loading from a flash drive or some other boot source. So while I just give that a polite couple of moments, what kind of storage do we actually have in this? I see two SATA cables down here, and this being a system integrator build, so PC Specialists are a system integrator. They are a PC building service in the UK, a very big one at that. PC Specialist builds are very common. The fact that we have two SATA cables means there's probably a 3.5-inch hard drive and a 2.5-inch SATA SSD in this thing. So I'm not expecting any M.2 drives in here. So already my early guess is, being a system integrator build, it has the cheapest SSD money can buy in it, and that has failed. And that's one of the principal drawbacks of system integrator builds. The SSD is the biggest place that they're going to cheap out. So yeah, I'm calling it from here. I think there is I'm going to say ADATA. I'm going to say it's got an ADATA 2.5-inch SSD in it that's conked out. This isn't going to boot. Let's turn it off. So I'm going to disconnect the SATA cables there. And just for demonstration, I'll start it again. And this time, because we've disconnected the SSD and the hard drive, the system will literally find no boot source. So this time it should go directly into BIOS because there's nothing to boot from. And there you go. So this time it went directly to BIOS because there was nothing to boot from, and if there's nothing to boot from, a modern motherboard goes into BIOS setup. So that confirms that. And for the record, while we're here, we can just see what we've got. We've got a 3800 XT uncommon, 16 gigs of RAM at 2400. That's depressing. That's the other place that system integrators will cheap out. You'll often end up with crap RAM in there. So yeah, that's a bummer. It's not the end of the world, but a 3800 XT has definitely got more to give with some faster memory. However, that is not a problem that we're here to solve. Let's turn it off and have a look at that SSD. Oh, I'm going to move my coffee away from that. There you go, comment section. Go wild. You love it. You love to see it. Hey, there's 2 SSDs in there. What are you? All right, that's a Samsung QVO. It's not an Evo, so it's not one of Samsung's best. But these QVO drives, they should be okay. I've used these things in the past, and I've not seen any failures from these. But it is, yeah, it is one of their more budget drives. It is VNAND though, so you know it should be okay. That one looks fine. So date on that is 2020. Let's take the other drive out and inspect that one. I am going to deal with this dust, by the way. I'm just not going to deal with it right now. I'm going to get the drives out so I can look for problems. Dust isn't the reason why this thing doesn't boot Windows. So while the dust is gross, it's not my concern right now. I want to look at these drives. That much being said, there is so much dust here that I'm like, okay. What my intention will be is probably to plug these drives into my test rig and just fire up Crystal Disk Info on them and do a couple of other, you know, benchmark tests and stuff like that. And while I verify whether these drives are shot or not, I'll take the computer out the back and air dust it. All right, and that's another QVO 1 terabyte. So these drives are identical. All right. Let's deal with this dust, just because this thing is actually quite horrid. I was trying to gloss over it so I could get on with the video, but this is unmanageable. Okay, Disk Info isn't reporting any problems with the drive. We've got no red or orange dots there. I'm just going to quickly throw Crystal Disk Mark at it as well. And I do this just as a confidence test, just to make sure that we get back some results that make sense, basically. So I'm just going to throw just the 2 gig test at it and just see what it spits out. So we don't care if it's giving blistering performance here. What I'm checking for is if the read speed comes back at 50 megabytes per second, then we know there's a problem. Whereas what it should be giving is about 500 to 550. 550 is theoretically where SATA 3 tops out. So the kind of speeds that we're getting there on the early reports there at 562, that's saturating the bus. That is as fast as SATA 3 can go. So that's a good result. Let's see what the other ones come in at though. And these results we've gotten back look completely fine to me. As I say, we can do analysis and we can say, you know, this isn't the big picture of drive performance. You know, this doesn't account for sustained reads writes and things like that. For example, if you were to try and throw, you know, a 100 gigabyte folder onto this SSD, how long can it write at 500 megs for before the cache fills up and the performance drops and things like that? That's not what we're here to settle. What we're looking for is for if any of these numbers came back as 4 or something like that. You know, I have seen failed drives where like the write speeds were coming in at 10 and that kind of thing. And that's a classic sign that the drive is on its way out, where the drive seems to work, but just, man, something feels wrong with it. And the reason for that might be that it's just not writing properly. That's not what we're seeing here. So at this point, we've no reason to believe there's anything wrong with this drive. I'm going to swap it out to the other drive and see what that one does. So the customer drive has mounted here, and we've got a directory listing. What I might do, I'm going to back this up while I have the opportunity. I don't know if the customer has important data on here or not, but in my experience, when you don't trust a drive, if the drive has mounted, you should probably try and back it up immediately, because that might be the last time you see that data. So I'm just going to immediately back this thing up just in case. So at the moment, the things that I'm thinking about is we had symptoms that there was a problem with the SSDs, or one of them, the boot SSD at least. But that's not what we're seeing when we plug them into another computer. Of course, this could be a software issue, but if it was a software issue, I would expect some kind of error message, not the computer to just be hanging on boot. The symptoms we've got don't really track with a software issue. So I'm going to plug another SSD into the customer's computer and try and boot Windows from it and just sanity check that while I wait for this backup to run. At the moment, kind of swinging towards a software issue at the moment, but More testing is needed. Time to find out if my test SSD actually has anything on it. I think it's got a version of Windows there for testing, but I can't remember. Right, and once again, it's not doing anything. It's not going into BIOS, but it's not trying to boot anything either. The problem is I don't recall if there's actually anything on this drive. So I'm going to grab a Windows boot drive and see what's on it. I've plugged a Windows 11 boot drive in the back. So this time I'll actually crash into BIOS and boot from USB. And then we can have a quick look just to see what's going on. Can we get BIOS? Doesn't want to go into BIOS either. Yeah, it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to try moving my drive to a different SATA connector. I wonder if just the SATA controller has just died on this thing or something like that. And we had a post beep out of it. So it has posted, but again, it's really upset about something. BIOS is updating LED firmware. Come again? Oh, I don't like that at all. Why is the BIOS trying to update stuff? Ugh. Is this a botched BIOS update? So what we saw just then, that wasn't the BIOS itself doing an update, but it updated the RGB controller on the motherboard. When you do a BIOS update on a motherboard, it will often be accompanied by other small firmware updates, such as updating the EC, or if it's an Intel system, an ME update. And often if there is RGB stuff, yeah, same thing, it's cycling on that. You'll see LED firmware, because there'll be a LED RGB chip on the motherboard that does all your RGB. So it's in some kind of loop where it's trying to do that. I don't like this at all. I'm just going to pull out the drive again. I'm just going to hot pull that, just see what it does. If it starts just working normally again with that drive disconnected, yeah, something funky is going on with this. What? What are you booting from? Oh, okay, yeah, that's the Windows flash drive that's in there. Okay. Yeah. I forgot I had the flash drive in the back, and I saw the Windows loading spinner, and I was like, there's nothing connected. Okay, right. This computer seems to really not like having SATA devices connected to it. It started from the Windows flash drive just fine. I'm going to get an NVMe drive, and we're going to connect one of those up instead. Let's just check what the RTC battery is doing as well, because that firmware updating was a bit spooky. I don't understand why it was trying to do that. Multimeter into voltage mode. Put the black probe on a screw hole. And just touch the top of the battery. 3.04. That's on the low side, but I wouldn't class that as problematic. That's worth changing at some point, but that's not causing us problems. I'm not super hectic about changing the RTC battery on a desktop computer until it's actually causing an issue, because it's extremely easy to just pop that out and put another one in. I'm a lot more stringent with laptops, because a laptop, you have to disassemble the whole sodding laptop to get to the battery. So if it's vaguely low, it's worth replacing it at the time for preventative maintenance. This is something that the customer can do, so we don't need to be quite so stringent about it. Right, let's turn this on and see if it starts from an NVMe drive. Right, it went directly into BIOS. Okay, I'm just going to save and exit first. I could hit boot override right now, but I want it to do it itself. I don't want to tell it where to boot from. It should be able to figure this out. That's a black screen. Are we going back to our LED firmware update again? Right, just had to answer the phone. It did an LED update again. And now my NVMe drive isn't detected. This BIOS feels funky. This BIOS feels super funky. What BIOS is this? Tell me your secrets. Right, 3404. And the BIOS date on it is July 2023. So it's been a hot minute since it's had an update. Let's flash the BIOS on this thing and just see if everything starts working. I'm swinging away from this being an a SATA issue now. Just this motherboard just seems to have issues with posting. So let's shift gears. This motherboard is a Strix B550F Gaming. Really nice AM4 motherboard. Like if you're building AM4, which is still viable for low-cost computers, this is a great motherboard to be building in. This isn't the Wi-Fi version, but there is a Wi-Fi version of it as well. So let's jump onto the ASUS website and get a BIOS file. So the latest BIOS is November 2024. And looks like it's just some general bug fixes. Anything else interesting? Being an AM4 motherboard, there's a lot of updates that are just circulate around security updates and just new CPU updates, because there's like 200 CPUs that would fit this motherboard. Let's download the latest. So this gives us a zip file containing our actual BIOS file and a BIOS renamer. We only need to use the BIOS renamer if we're going to do BIOS flashback, which is when we use the flashback button on the back of the motherboard. I'm not going to do that. We're going to do a BIOS update just from within BIOS because the computer starts and runs. This is much more preferable because you get a lot more information and you can see what's going on. So I would not recommend doing BIOS flashback unless you're in a bricked motherboard situation and you have no other choice. I might need to restart the computer for it to recognize the flash drive I've just plugged in, but we'll just start Easy Flash 3 and see what happens. And yeah, it's seen it there. There's my flash drive. So there's our updated file. So we're currently on version 3404 and we're going up to version 3611. So we'll select that file. And yeah, we're not running BitLocker on this, so we don't need to worry about that warning message. So I think a lot of people are going to assume that the customer has tried to do a BIOS update and botched it or something like that. I don't think that's the case. The customer didn't mention that to me, and in my experience, customers will tell you if they've been doing stuff like this. The customer said that there were Windows updates, but they didn't say they were trying to update the BIOS. And yeah, like I say, I've no reason to disbelieve him. I don't believe customers when they tell me that they didn't spill the cup of water all over their laptop. But I do believe customers when they say that they had not tried to do a BIOS update on it. Windows will do BIOS updates on computers now and then, but this is pretty rare on a desktop computer. I don't think I've ever seen a custom-built computer try and receive a BIOS update from Windows before. OEM computers and laptops, absolutely, they do it all the time. But a custom build or a system integrator build like this, not something I've seen. So again, I don't think this is a botched update, but this whole problem we're seeing just reeks of some kind of whack BIOS corruption. And updating it again will hopefully just straighten that out. Either the updated BIOS will just solve some problems or weird gremlins that it has, or just simply the act of writing a new BIOS program will solve the problem. Or to give it its correct term, this is UEFI. BIOS doesn't exist anymore. But we call it that just because that's the term that everyone's familiar with. I'm going to leave this to run. I'll see you after the cut. So our BIOS update is complete. It might have done some extra stuff after the reboot that I didn't see because I was away, but we've rebooted to the recovery screen, which is where we want to be. So let's just F1 to run setup, and we're going to confirm that we're on the BIOS revision that we're expecting to be on, which is 3611. That looks great. And are we detecting? No, we're not detecting our SSD. All right. Okay. Man, is the PCH on this motherboard just wrecked? What do you think, folks? If I move my NVMe drive up to the top slot, that connects it directly to the CPU. This bottom slot goes through the PCH. Let's just save and exit first. So we've got two possible boot sources. My Windows flash drive is still plugged in, and we've got an NVMe drive that has Windows 11 on it. So it should start something. Let's see. It's going to update the LED firmware again, isn't it? What is this motherboard doing? I'll wait for it to do its thing. Then I think the next thing I'm going to do is actually just reset the BIOS, because I haven't actually done that yet. Doubtless there's been people screaming at their monitors over that. That's just not... You go on gut feeling, and my gut has not been telling me that this is a reset BIOS issue. When the computer posts, resetting BIOS generally doesn't help. Let's move the NVMe drive to the top slot. The fact that it doesn't want to boot from the flash drive at the moment kind of makes me believe that... Okay, what now? HDMI, power, keyboard and mouse. So we've got the NVMe drive in the top slot. No flash drive is connected. We get a post screen. And it went into BIOS. Okay. Is the NVMe drive detected? It doesn't look like it. Right, yes, the NVMe drive is detected. It's just not detected as a boot option. If this doesn't work, I think I'm actually going to have to start doing like no-post diagnostics. You know, like bare boot, take out the wireless card, test the RAM, stuff like that. I've skipped past all of this because the computer posts. I can't see a world where there's anything wrong with that other stuff, but like, what a weird issue. It's doing the LED firmware update thing again. Yeah, okay. It's not showing it on the screen, but it's going to. Okay, I'm resetting the BIOS. Power off at the back. Pop the CMOS battery out. I'll put a fresh one in while I'm here. I can't see how resetting the BIOS or changing the battery could possibly fix this problem. However, let's cover all the bases. Power on. So we should get a BIOS recovery screen now where it says BIOS has been reset. Or it could just hang. Alright, I'm getting the Memtest drive. I'm going to take my NVMe drive back out just so it posts reliably and doesn't try and boot from anything else. Okay, so Memtest 86 drive is in the back. We'll turn it on. It should start from that drive because it has nowhere else to start from. We have seen it boot from the Windows flash drive, so we know that it can boot from a flash drive. Whether it does or not is another question, though. It looks like it's going to mess me about again, and it's doing this while there's no SSDs in there. So again, this doesn't seem to be related to drives being connected as such. Except for how, you know, obviously it's got a flash drive connected. There's the LED firmware update again. I'll let it cycle through this. Okay. We're going into Memtest now. if it's going to do the LED firmware update, it definitely seems like I need to actually let it finish doing that before it will try and do anything else. I think there's certain circumstances where it might actually start from any given device. You just have to do everything in a certain order. So there's probably a world where we could make it start from one of the NVMe drives or even the customer's drive, which might explain why the customer has occasionally said, oh, it tries to start Windows and then fails, or something like that. But yeah, none of that seems to be happening here. I'm going to leave this running, and more than that, I'm going to leave this running overnight because it's 20 minutes past closing time and I'm out of ideas with this. So I'm going to come back fresh, and I think we're actually going to just go into proper no-post diagnostics, and I'm going to start treating this as a no-post instead of a no-boot, because it is failing to boot into a system, and it apparently is posting, but given the fact that we've thrown 3 different boot sources from it, 4 if you count my my 2.5-inch SSD that I tried once. We've tried multiple boot sources and flash drives, and it doesn't want to start any of those. So this isn't an issue with storage, it's not an issue with the SATA controller, it's not an issue with it being USB or not. This motherboard is failing to start in some form or another. Just because it's getting to the BIOS screen doesn't, that should be a successful post, but clearly there is something more that's going on here. It is morning, and we have a full pass on Memtest, so probably not that. Man, am I gonna just change out the CPU? Ugh. I think I should probably pull this thing apart next. I'm gonna have the morning coffee and stuff like that, and then I guess we'll pull this thing apart. What a bizarre problem. Well, there was a lot of dust on the heatsink. This is after I cleaned it all out, and the thermal paste was pretty baked, so that's not a great sign for the CPU. But let's keep going. I'm gonna take the motherboard out as well, and I'm gonna set it up on the bench. I have a spare CPU that I can drop in this for testing purposes, so we can find out if that's the problem. Right, this is all set up now. So I've basically just taken everything out of the case. We've got a different graphics card just for convenience, but I'm not expecting that to matter. So for the time being, we're just going to turn it on again and just see what happens and just make sure we still have the same issue. And then we can start swapping components out and see if we start making progress with this thing. Here we go. Right, there's our post. No keyboard detected. Oh, okay. Right, reboot, select proper device. Oh yeah, that's just because okay, that's just because I had switched on CSM boot and stuff like that. Okay, let's I'll tell you what, I'm going to do a BIOS reset on this. So let's just power this off again. I think we are, because the yeah, BIOS is updating LED firmware. Okay. Yeah, we're back to our stuck post screen. So this has got the same fault. Right, I'm going to power this off, and I'm going to put a different CPU in it. I would speculate on what I think is going wrong with it right now, but to be perfectly honest, I have no idea what's going on with this thing right now. I've already gone through theories of, you know, I've already tried to approach this in the way that I normally would, and that has led me kind of nowhere. So I'm just going to throw parts at it. This is a 5700G, which is in fact the faulty 5700G from a recent video. It does work to boot Windows up, so while it's not a reliable CPU, it's good enough to see if we get a different reaction. So let's see what it does. Right, new CPU. Yes. I'm going to be kind of mad if this is the CPU. In the previous video where we had this dead 5700G, there were plenty of comments being like, sort of, oh, AMD CPUs, they fail all the time. Honestly, I just haven't seen much of it. I'm not saying that it can't happen or that it doesn't happen. It's just really uncommon, despite what YouTube might tell you. Oh no, yeah, I think we fixed it. And this will be 2 dead CPUs in a row I've had, which is kind of a bummer and doesn't really sell my my message of don't worry, the CPU is not really going to be an issue. This won't be your problem, etc., etc. I'm going to quickly hit this with a load because otherwise this CPU will crash. Okay, well, I guess this is unfortunate because, yeah, we're sitting and running a stress test in Windows now, and it seems to have booted up just fine. So what I will do, I will move the customer's... we'll give this a couple of reboots just to make sure it's not a fluke, and then we'll move the customer's CPU to my test motherboard to confirm, but it looks like we've got another dead CPU at this point. Which is a big shame. I know there's going to be folks in the comments section who's just like sort of, oh, AMD CPUs, they're not reliable. And I know we've had 2 in a row. And I don't want to say to ignore what you're seeing in front of your eyes. But like I say, it's not that common. It's easy to look at repair channels like mine and other big YouTube channels that do desktop PC repair. And, you know, they'll say sort of, oh, you know, we see dead AMD CPUs regularly and stuff like that. But this is still a small percentage, and I'm not trying to downplay that by doing the Apple a handful of customers excuse, but it really is not a common issue. Yeah, this is fine now. Okay. Let's get the customer's 3800 XT in another motherboard and confirm it. And off we go. Right, new CPU installed. Fan error. Nonsense, I'm plugged into the right place. Fine. Don't care. F1 to run setup. Then save and exit. So will this motherboard exhibit exactly the same symptoms, or is our fault going to appear differently? Our survey says... FTPM prompt, yeah, okay. I mean, if it just power cycles every time... Okay, it's fallen back to CSM boot. See, it sees that we have a UEFI operating system installed. It just won't boot it. This is one of those times where I wish I understood more about what UEFI is and how a UEFI install of Windows differs from a CSM install of Windows, because there's clearly some interesting interactions going on here that I don't understand. But also it's clearly not going to work. I'm going to give it one more restart I'll just save and exit. Actually, I'll just power off and power on again. Then, on the assumption that it doesn't work this time, we'll put in the known good CPU and confirm that the board then proceeds to work normally. And at that point, that'll be it. That'll be our diagnostic. Fan error. Yeah, I don't care. I have no idea why we're getting a fan error because I'm definitely plugged into the right fan header. I think I'm going to have to retire the catchphrase, "It's never the CPU, except when it is," because I think it's just entirely viable for it to be the CPU these days. During Intel's long era of being on top, so, you know, basically throughout the entire core series up until, well, the entire core series up until 13th and 14th gen, it was really rare for a desktop CPU to fail, but I just don't think you can reliably say it won't be the CPU anymore, which is fair. Right, we'll probably get at least one more reboot because it's going to do a FTPM warning now, and then after this reboot, then it should actually try and start. There we go. Okay, yeah, it's a dead CPU. We're done here. I'm going to go talk to the customer and get a new CPU for this thing. So probable candidates will be a 5600X because cheap, or a 5700X 3D because it's the fastest available for this platform. What graphics card was this again? It was 2060 Super. Yeah, I mean, if I were the customer, I'd get a 5700X 3D. Because if you're going to buy a new CPU for AM4, you may as well buy the best bang for buck one that's like 95% as fast as the best chip available. So yeah, that's what I would do, but it's up to them. So I'll get back to you when I've got more. We're back, and we've got a Ryzen 5700X 3D to go in this thing now. So this was the preferable option, and probably the best bang for buck CPU you can put in this platform now. So the only thing above this is the 5800X 3D, and the 5800X 3D costs, it's a significant amount more than the 5700X 3D, and it's only like a tiny bit faster. The 5700X 3D is really, really good bang for buck. You can pick these things up for about 170 quid on eBay in the UK, but if you look on AliExpress, you can find them even cheaper than that. Be aware that when you see them listed on AliExpress, you're looking at the no ex-VAT price, so without tax. But even still, if you don't mind waiting a little bit of time, you can pick up a bargain, and it'll show up in a packet just like this one. Right, so that's in. Let's slap some thermal paste on that and get the cooler fitted. Okay, TPM has been reset. Yes, okay. And given that we've already done a BIOS update on this motherboard, we should be good to go just straight into Windows now at this point. Something that I probably should have mentioned is obviously if you're planning on doing a CPU upgrade on your computer, then you should update your BIOS first, because updating the BIOS when you don't have a working CPU in there is a lot harder. Not impossible, but a lot harder. Let's see. We're not turning on XMP because it's 2400 RAM, so never mind. Cool, in that case I will just save and exit. There we go, and that has booted up into Windows straight away, no hesitation. So that is all sorted. So another strange fault, definitely looks like it was overheating related due to that cooked thermal paste and a lot of dust on the CPU cooler, which is a shame. However, customer is walking away from this with a upgraded CPU. So that's all good in the long run anyway, because they're getting more performance. So thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.